You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the #1 in nationalist news.
Headlines of the news today, Friday the 27th of April. War of words in Scotland between Labour and the SNP. Investigation of electoral fraud in Tower Hamlets. Pilot scheme to give 13-year-old girls the morning after pill. Salford British National Party takes over the hustings from Labour. From the belly of the beast, Nick Griffin MEP. Liberian ex-president found guilty of war crimes. Drugged £200 bear drops out of tree in the United States. UK news. A war of words has been going on between Labour and the SNP in Scotland. The argument escalated after a report by the SNP saying that since the year 2007, a tenth of Labour councillors have left their party to join other political parties or become independent. The Labour Party is finished in Scotland, one nationalist reporter has said. If the Scots can kick them out, then so can the English. Investigations of electoral fraud in Tower Hamlets are underway by the Metropolitan Police. The resulting report will highlight the voting discrepancies which resulted in a win for Labour in the 2010 general elections and the surprise defeat of Nick Griffin of the British National Party. One of the items being looked into are the legalities of 1- and 2-bedroom flats having 10 or more registered voters, which were discovered just weeks before the council elections. When Hodge gained the most votes in Tower Hamlets and won her seat there, independent investigators discovered that there were more than 20 voters at one address alone. A nationalist spokesperson commented, "This investigation is long overdue and will turn over many stones to the embarrassment of the Labour Party, whose voting tactics are becoming well known now." There is outrage amongst parents concerning the pilot scheme for the NHS to give the pill to girls as young as 13 without parental consent or knowledge. This latest bit of social engineering is being piloted in the Isle of Wight in the south and Manchester in the north. It is manna from heaven for the Muslim paedophile gangs in Britain, just what they want. The next thing will be the age of consent will be lowered and Harriet Harman and the Paedophile Information Exchange will have got what it wanted. The Salford British National Party turned out in force to face down the Labour Party at the live BBC radio broadcast of the Salford mayoral hustings last night in Manchester, but Labour never showed up. These cowards made their excuse and said their reason for not turning up was that the British National Party was attending. Apparently during the session a recording was played and communist anti-British hate spilled out. People in the audience were wondering if that was legal to hustings, but as Labour in Salford pulls the strings, they always get their way. At the end, the chairperson and radio presenter Alan Beswick put it to the audience about Labour not turning up, and everyone cheered. The last comment was by a British National Party attendee who shouted "Kick Labour out of the council," to which he received a standing ovation and massive applause. The Euro News from the belly of the beast with Nick Griffin MEP.
Well, we're just entering the final straight in another hard-fought election campaign. Just this weekend, plus 4 days, then the lawns can get cut, the skirting board can be painted, and the maiden aunts can be visited. Till then, though, I hope to see some of you on the campaign trail in the North West and in London especially. The mayoral contests in London, Liverpool and Salford have all seen us get extensive coverage in the broadcast media, although of course not as much as we would have had if every party which stands were to get equal time on TV and radio, as would happen in a proper democracy. Funny, isn't it? The BBC, Sky and the political elite whine on and on about how opposition parties in Russia don't get equal share of TV time. But the minute it comes to Britain, they all agree that the one party with 3 names is entitled to hog the limelight over here, and that they're entitled to deny the public the right to hear what the new kids on the block have to say. Yet again, it's one rule for our masters, and another for the rest of us. Some of you may have read my recent comparison of the electoral process in Russia and Britain. The question of access to the media is only one small aspect of the UK's chronic democratic deficit, which is highlighted in my report. If you haven't already read it, I hope that you'll do so now. If you have, please send it on to other people. The ruling elite has already lost all credibility in terms of competence and personal honesty. but there's still a lingering belief out there that the British political system is, in itself, still reasonably sound. In these days of ever more influential social media and the declining influence of the old mass media, getting out the true facts about the utterly rotten state of British democracy into public view can help to undermine that last remaining bastion of establishment credibility. And once all respect for the system has gone, changing it for good is only one crisis away. The facts in my report certainly shock people. I explained some of them to several highly placed Russians this week, and they were amazed at just how undemocratic and flawed our system is compared to theirs. RT really should pick up on it, instead of wasting their time giving plugs to the anti-Russian, neocon-backed UKIP. RT, in case you've not already discovered it, is the Russia Today satellite TV news channel. It's the only mainstream source of honest news. It regularly airs brilliant exposés of the corruption of the international banking system and of the warmongering and deceitful propaganda of the BBC and the big American channels. Do take a look. The Russians who were with me in the belly of the Brussels beast this week were part of a delegation including Valery Yazev, a member of the Russian Parliament, the Duma, who is president of the Russian Gas Society, and a highly qualified mining engineer and economist. Mr. Yazev was the main speaker at a conference on the potential for cooperation between Russia and the EU. This is not a subject that appeals to the fundamentally anti-Russian majority in the Parliament, but it is one that makes sense and appeals enormously to us in the nationalist minority. I was pleased to hear this top-flight energy expert saying all sorts of things that echo the British National Party's own analysis and policies in this wide-ranging field. He spoke of resource exhaustion, of the need for ultra-safe modern nuclear power as a vital part of the energy mix, of how wind and solar power have potential but are at present in their early stages of development and need not much more research, and, in response to a question from me, of how the thorium reactors we advocate are likely to dominate energy production all around the world in 20 or 30 years. Also very welcome were his comments on man-made climate change, which he described as total nonsense. As I tweeted from the meeting, I like this man. On the subject of global warming, even James Lovelock, the darling of the Green movement, and the man who dreamt up the concept of planet Earth as a single living organism, Gaia, admitted earlier this week that he was wrong about man-made climate change and massively overestimated the scale, speed and threat of the process. So we see the theory of man-made greenhouse gas, carbon-based global warming in retreat and collapse. The hoax of the 21st century is dying on its feet. And yet, in Westminster and in Brussels, our masters are pressing ahead with their insane plans to spend billions and pile on so-called green taxes, fighting a malignant tooth fairy. The EU in particular is dominated by people who, having lost all touch with scientific reality and common sense, are determined to deindustrialise Europe in order to save polar bears from having to swim long distances between icebergs, the very thing, of course, for which these cuddly killers are designed. Whether the Europhiles will get the chance to impose their latter-day mercantile plan is, however, another matter entirely. It's becoming increasingly possible that the entire EU project could simply collapse under the weight of its own contradictions and sheer economic unviability, just like the previous exercise in socialist utopianism, the USSR. When they came up with the idea of a single European currency, they knew all along that it would in due course create a financial crisis on account of the productivity gap between Germany and the Mediterranean states. That was all part of the plan, because they believed that such a crisis would be beneficial, in that it would open the way to the solution they wanted all along, for Germany to bail everyone out in exchange for total economic union. What they failed to see, however, was that the planned productivity gap crisis would end up being rolled together with a gigantic crisis of the world debt-based banking system, hitting the buffers with the end of the cheap energy that made economic expansion the norm. So now they have a crisis that they cannot manipulate, control, or cure. Their game is nearly up. Human history will not end, as the globalists were so convinced only a few years ago. Human history is not a straight line about to come to an end. It's an ever-turning wheel. The age of empires and globalism is at an end. The time of nations and their freedom is coming around again. all nations, including ours, the one that gave the world the concept of freedom in the first place.
World News. The ex-Liberian President, Mr Charles Taylor, has been found guilty of aiding war crimes in the war-torn country of Sierra Leone at The Hague. He has been on trial for 5 years and his defence lawyer, Nick Griffin-This, told the BBC that the trial had not been fair, but rather prompted by political imperatives. Judge Lusick said that as Liberian leader, Taylor had extended, sustained and significant support to the Revolutionary United Front, RUF, rebels in neighbouring Sierra Leone. The judge said the accused had sold arms and bought weapons on behalf of the RUF and knew the rebels were committing atrocities. Amongst the atrocities committed by these often child soldiers were mass murder, rape, the lopping off of limbs, and some simply too awful to relate on news, most of which were funded and encouraged by Taylor. Taylor also used the blood diamond trade to finance his high living whilst these terrible atrocities were being committed and the people of his country starved. He will be sentenced on the 30th of May. And finally, a tranquilised bear dropped out of a tree on a Colorado University campus. A 200-pound black bear that climbed into a tree near a student hall of residence at Colorado University was successfully brought back to earth. The bear was spotted wandering around Williams Village in Boulder, Colorado on Thursday morning by surprised residents who notified the police. Officials tried to corner the animal, but it climbed 15 feet up a tree nearby in an attempt to escape. US Wildlife Department officials shot the bear with 2 tranquilizer darts before it tumbled from its perch onto a mattress below. Black bears usually come out of hibernation in March and April and start to scavenge for food, which may have led it into the city. Colorado Parks and Wildlife spokesperson Jennifer Churchill said the bear had been tagged and relocated to the foothills west of Boulder. Oh, bless it. I hope they gave it some honey, mummy. From all the team at Radio Britain, our thoughts are with the many party officials, members, activists and supporters who have made the push for the Greater London Assembly mayoral elections possible these past weeks, and especially for our candidates in London and not forgetting those in Liverpool and Salford. This is a pivotal time for the British National Party and all who sail in her. For St George and for Great Britain, this is the final weekend push, so keep up the good work. You know it makes sense, in the words of Del Boy. You have been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and we all wish you a very happy and safe weekend. Between Labour and the SNP, investigation of electoral fraud in Tower Hamlets, pilot scheme to give 13-year-old girls the morning after pill, Salford British National Party takes over the hustings from Labour, from the belly of the beast, Nick Griffin MEP, Liberian ex-president found guilty of war crimes, drugged 200-pound bear drops out of tree in the United States. In Tower Hamlets and won her seat there, independent investigators discovered that there were more than 20 voters at one address alone. A nationalist spokesperson commented, "This investigation is long overdue and will turn over many stones to the embarrassment of the Labour Party, whose voting tactics are becoming well known now." There is outrage amongst parents concerning the pilot scheme for the NHS to give the pill to girls. UK News. A war of words has been going on between Labour and the SNP in Scotland. The argument escalated after a report by the SNP saying that since the year 2007, a tenth of Labour councillors have left their party to join other political parties or become independent. The Labour Party is finished in Scotland, one nationalist reporter has said. If the Scots can kick them out, then so can the English.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. Nationalist news.
Headlines of the news today, Friday the 27th of April. War of words in Scotland between investigations of electoral fraud in Tower Hamlets are underway by the Metropolitan Police. The resulting report will highlight the voting discrepancies which resulted in a win for Labour in the 2010 general elections and the surprise defeat of Nick Griffin of the British National Party. One of the items being looked into are the legalities of 1- and 2-bedroom flats having 10 or more registered voters, which were discovered just weeks before the council elections. When Hodge gained the most votes